far-reaching economic consequences, disrupting supply chains and affecting livelihoods, even in Southern Africa. Speaking to the media on the sidelines of the Southern African Development Community Council of Ministers meeting underway in Pretoria, South Africa, Haimbe says Zambia believes armed conflict is not a solution to disputes, noting that wars in regions such as the Middle East, as well as conflicts in Sudan and the Gaza Strip, are already impacting global energy markets and supply chains.
For us, the mantra as pushed forward by President Hakainde Hichilema has always been that conflict anywhere is conflict everywhere, and it's disruptive. So from that perspective alone, regardless of where we're talking about the conflict being, right now the raging conflict is in the Middle East and is causing disruption to all of us across the globe. Issues relating to, for example, the petroleum sector and supply chains that have been disrupted will have a telling impact and are already having a telling impact on our economies as far down here as we are in the Southern Africa region. So Sudan, talk about Gaza, talk about any conflict on the globe.
South Africa's Home Affairs Deputy Minister Njabulo Nzuza says a project is already in place to deal with stateless South African children. Nzuza was responding to reports that more than 10,000 children were without birth certificates or official identification documents. This makes it difficult for them to access services such as education and social grants. Nzuza says they have started to address the problem in the KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces.
Currently, we do have a project that is dealing with the late registration of births. Very soon, I think in KwaZulu-Natal, there is about 4,000 of those, plus or minus 4,000 of those. In Gauteng, we're looking at about 6,000 somewhere there. So we are dealing with the matter to make sure that we register those children.
Iceland and the Netherlands have full declarations to join South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. It brings the number of countries seeking to participate in the proceedings to 18. Both states have full declarations under Article 63 of the court statute, which allows countries that are parties to a treaty at issue in a case to intervene in order to present the interpretation of that treaty. In the case that South Africa brought in December 2023, it accuses Israel of violating the 1948 Genocide Convention through its military campaign in Gaza. Since October 2023, Israel has so far killed over 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza, most of them women and children. The UN says that more than 4 million people have been internally displaced in Afghanistan, Iran, Lebanon and Pakistan since the beginning of the current military escalation in the Middle East. UN Chief Spokesperson Stephen Dujarric says that according to UN humanitarian agencies, the Middle East region is home to some of the largest numbers of people in humanitarian assistance globally. He says the recent escalation risks deepening civilian suffering and causing further damage to already fragile civilian infrastructure.
And just on Iran alone, our colleagues at UNHCR is telling us that between 600,000 and 1 million Iranian households are now temporarily displaced inside their country as a result of the ongoing conflict. This is a preliminary assessment, and that adds up to about 3.2 million people. They said this figure is likely to continue to rise as hostilities persist, adding that, as you can imagine, it will just add yet another level of humanitarian needs.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 117 144459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulo Mwepe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headline, Mamelodi Sundowns coach laments lack of support for their Champions League campaign. And Springbok fly half Sasha Feinberg Mngomezulu is relishing the upcoming Nations Cup clash against England. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
This is Africa Update, your pulse to the continent. Stories shaping nations and voices driving change. Stay informed, stay connected, right here on Channel Africa, the African Perspective.
Well, coming up in this hour, Save the Children have suspended operations in parts of South Sudan after violence forced aid agencies to withdraw from key areas. And a legal challenge has been filed in the High Court of Zimbabwe concerning proposed constitutional changes. Stay connected to Africa and the world with Channel Africa, the international voice of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Watch or listen anytime, anywhere at channelafrica.co.za, on the Channel Africa mobile app and on SABC Plus, or via the DSTV and OpenView audio bouquets. You can also catch us on social media at Channel Africa on Facebook and at Channel Africa 1 on all other platforms. Channel Africa, first with the African story globally.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
Well, on today's hashtag Africa Update asks, a legal challenge has been filed in the High Court of Zimbabwe concerning proposed constitutional changes and growing political tensions around them. What do you make of the latest happening in Zimbabwe? Share your thoughts on Channel Africa's social media platforms at Channel Africa 1 on X and Instagram, at Channel Africa on Facebook, or you can send us your comments and voice notes to our WhatsApp number +27 832 886684.
Africa Update, your daily dose of African insights with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
Former South African President Thabo Mbeki says the failure to realize children's rights is not a crisis limited to the country. He was speaking at the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund 30th Anniversary Gala Dinner hosted in Johannesburg, South Africa last night. He has called on South Africans and the world at large to honor Nelson Mandela's legacy by making the well-being and future of children the top priority in society and government policies. Nhlanhla Mahlangu reports.
The event marked 3 decades since the foundation's launch in 1996. Delivering the keynote address, Mbeki highlighted how Mandela's life showed that protecting and uplifting the youngest generation is key to building a just and prosperous nation.
And the failure to realize children's rights is not a crisis limited to this country. From Gaza to the displacement camps in South Sudan, to the 150 Iranian school children, schoolgirls, who died on the very first day of the current war between the US, Israel on one hand and Iran on the other, the world is engaged in a systematic failure to protect its youngest citizens. The vision of this fund, the belief that the caregiver and the child must be at the center of our political and institutional life, is a vision the world desperately needs.
CEO of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, Dr. Linda Nkomo, says over the past 3 decades, the fund has worked alongside communities and partners to elevate the voices of children and ensure their rights remain at the center of South Africa's social progress.
Well, the last 30 years have really been a journey, and they've been a journey of ensuring that we don't leave children behind. And the role that the fund has played in advocating for the rights of children is, one, creating platforms for children to be heard, because that's part of their rights. They have a right to be heard. They've got a right to adequate nutrition. And so we have been a part of the putting together of the National Strategy for Accelerated Action for Children. And in there, we've really focused on the issue of nutrition for children, focused on the stunting of children.
Child President of the Nelson Mandela Children's Parliament, Amogelang Mashele, says South Africa still faces big challenges for its young people. She commended the work of the fund.
When a country prioritizes its children, it doesn't spend, it invests in peace, in innovation, and in the kind of South Africa that Madiba stayed alive to imagine. So tonight, let's honor 30 years of stubborn love, 30 years of defending rights when it was inconvenient, 30 years of protecting dignity when it was messy, 30 years of seeing potential before it was polished. But anniversaries are more than just looking back. They are about asking one brave question: what will the next 30 years demand from us? Because children today still dream in communities that need support. They still carry ideas that could change this country if only someone believes in them. That belief is what Nelson Mandela Children's Fund has given us. We, the Children's Parliament, are not the next generation. We are this generation, and NMCF made space for our footsteps.
The 30th anniversary celebration brought together supporters, partners, and beneficiaries to look back on the foundation's impact while looking forward to ongoing challenges. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Tlantla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802. Africa is changing, and the world is paying attention. This March, Channel Africa invites you to be part of a new conversation. Africa Matters, a platform where experts, policymakers, and thought leaders come together to unpack the big issues of our time: technology, politics, economics, climate change, and the future of our people. This is where ideas meet action, where change becomes opportunity, where Africa's voice takes its rightful place on the global stage. In March 2026, Channel Africa hosts Africa Climate Change Recovery Summit. Join the dialogue. Be part of the movement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa Update, your daily dose of African insights. With Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
It is now 12 minutes past 12 Central African time. Humanitarian operations have been suspended in parts of South Sudan after escalating violence forced aid agencies to withdraw from key areas. Save the Children says it has relocated more than 45 staff and suspended operations in Jonglei State following a surge in fighting. At the time of the withdrawal, the organization was providing critical health, nutrition, education and protection services to around 100,000 children in the town of Akobo. The suspension of services comes after Sudan's military ordered civilians, NGOs and UN agencies to leave the area earlier this month. Save the Children is now calling on all parties to the conflict to respect international humanitarian law and ensure safe access for aid agencies. For more, we are now joined on the line by Director of Program Operations at Save the Children in South Sudan, Nwamaka Ifeonu. Amakwa, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the listeners.
Thank you. Can you tell us how dangerous has the situation become in South Sudan?
Well, dangerous is an understatement at this point, particularly in the Akobo area. Following the issue from the military forces on the 6th, asking NGOs, humanitarian actors, and civilians to evacuate the area ahead of an offensive planned within a 72-hour window. We saw mass displacement of persons who have already been displaced within the area and of civilians as well as humanitarian actors away. An abrupt packing and, seeking safety. And this has led to complete disruption to humanitarian services there. But more than that, we've seen in the immediate aftermath of that 72-hour window an uptick in violence, shelling, active fighting, looting, and just ongoing violence in the area over the past week. So when I say dangerous is an understatement, it is unsafe at this point for any civilians to be within the Akobo area.
Now, around 100,000 children were receiving services. What happens to them now that aid operations have stopped?
As you can imagine, the need to pack up and seek safety in a short 48 to 72 hours meant that they were running with very little of their belongings, but it also meant that they have now seen a truncating to the services that they may have been receiving. This includes nutrition services, health services, of course, a disruption to ongoing education in the area. So these children are now without basic and essential life-saving services that they were receiving. But more than that, they are displaced far away from home with limited access to food, no safe drinking water, almost non-existent sanitation facilities, and just disruption to care and life-saving services that they were receiving, of course, amongst other protection concerns. And this is particularly concerning because it exacerbates an already poor nutrition status for many of these children. And all of these together end up compounding into risk factors for disease outbreaks like cholera and the like.
Now, what are the biggest risks that children are facing right now?
If you can just imagine children living out in the open with their families, camped out, away from home, without food, without safe drinking water, no shelter, and no sense of immediate hope, no sense of when they get to return home, no sense of whether things will normalize. And in a distance, they can see the shelling, they can see the fighting, they can see all of that going on. These, in addition to the living conditions they find themselves in at the moment, already pose risk factors to their health. But it also poses to their physical health, but it also poses risk factors to their mental health, just wondering what is to come in the days ahead. And then on top of that, we're talking of the potential for disease outbreak if they remain in that condition for a protracted period without access to safe drinking water and with limited sanitation services in the environs. So your guess is as good as mine when I say that children right now are predisposed to severe risk factors to their health and to their overall well-being.
Now, we understand that hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Where are these families going, and what conditions are people living in after fleeing the violence?
So within Akobo town, following violence that had started back in December, there was already an upwards of 80,000 persons displaced from the larger Jonglei area, living in the Akobo East region. These persons who were living amongst host communities now had to be redisplaced along with other civilians and indigenes of the Akobo East area themselves. Many of them have fled into neighboring Ethiopia and the regions around there in search of safer grounds and places where they can be, at least in the immediate, assured that no immediate harm is coming to them, no shelling is dropping around them or bombs dropping around them or anything of the sort. And so many of them are taking refuge in the border area between South Sudan and Ethiopia at the moment.
And finally, as we wrap up this conversation, what would need to happen for aid organizations to safely return to Akobo?
An assurance that civilians will be protected. At a time like this, it is critical to re-emphasize that the protection and safety of civilians should always be priority, especially even in the midst of escalating conflict. And that's why Save the Children is calling on all parties to the conflict to prioritize the protection of civilians, to respect international human laws, and ensure that safe, sustained, and unhindered humanitarian access is restored so that civilians can go back home and rebuild their lives, but also so that actors can go back home, go back to Akobo, and resume the provision of critical life-saving services to populations that so direly need them.
Amaka, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Okay, that was Director of Program Operations at Save the Children in South Sudan, Nwamaka Ifeonu.
60 years of stories and sounds. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Você é fluente em português? É apaixonado por rádio e quer trabalhar na África do Sul? Você tem documentos que o qualificam para trabalhar na África do Sul? Nesse caso, podemos ter uma oportunidade para você trabalhar no Canal África. Envie seu currículo e demonstração para Canal África at newsroom@ channelafrica.co.za. Lembre-se, se você não receber alguma resposta nossa em 14 dias, isso significa que você não foi selecionado. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Your window to the continent and beyond. Africa Update. Only on Channel Africa. Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Well, on today's hashtag Africa Update asks, a legal challenge has been filed in the High Court of Zimbabwe concerning proposed constitutional changes and growing political tensions around them. What do you make of the latest happening in Zimbabwe? You can share your thoughts on Channel Africa's social media platforms at Channel Africa 1 on X and Instagram, at Channel Africa on Facebook, or send us your comments and voice notes to our WhatsApp number +27 83288 6684.
Africa Update. Your daily dose of African insights with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa. Africa is changing and the world is paying attention. This March, Channel Africa invites you to be part of a new conversation. Africa Matters. A platform where experts, policymakers, and thought leaders come together to unpack the big issues of our time. Technology, politics, economics, climate change, and the future of our people. This is where ideas meet action, where change becomes opportunity, where Africa's voice takes its rightful place on the global stage. In March 2026, Channel Africa hosts Africa Climate Change Recovery Summit. Join the dialogue. Be part of the movement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Keep Africa in your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. channelafrica.co.za.
Ritmos e cultura. Com Jacob Tivani. Hoje vamos celebrar um momento muito especial na música, em particular o universo do jazz moçambicano. Ladies and gentlemen, senhoras e senhores, temos o privilégio de receber um dos maiores nomes do jazz de África, moçambicano e, por que não, o mundo lusófono, Moreira Xunguiça, para falarmos sobre o lançamento da edição especial em vinil do seu icônico álbum The Journey, The Moreira Project, Volume 1.
A música é que me escolheu e não foi eu que escolhi a música. O saxofone é que me escolheu, não fui eu que escolhi o saxofone. Eu sinto-me honrado, sinto-me de alguma maneira satisfeito e, mais importante, sinto-me feliz porque usamos o álbum The Journey como um influenciador, catalisador. Eu sinto-me honrado.
Ritmos e cultura com Jacob Tivani, todos os domingos das 20 às 21 horas.
Stella Longwe. Pamalonje.
Ndiyedu apa tindikatswiri oimba wa dziko la Mozambique ameneyu amene ali Ricabana. Ndatiuzeni kuti maimba ashamba shanji komanso dzina lanu lenileni koleka ngati dzina limeneli ndilijatu atila pa stage. Dzina lanu kwenikweni ndi ndani komanso maimba ashamba shanji?
Ineyo dzina langa lenileni ndine Ricardo Musa Rabana. Chamba chimene ndimaimba ine ndimanganji ndimakonda kwambiri ma tradition. Zimenezo ndi nyimbo zathu chifukwa kwathu kunoko tili ndi madansi osiyana-siyana a chimizi. Ndi ineyo poti ndi mnyamata wa chimizi ndi ndimakondanso nyimbo za chimizi.
Ndinu a chimizi? Ndi makondanso nyimbo za chimizi, mapanganso za chimizi. Zosangalatsa kuti mwanena poyera kuti ndinu a chimizi. Anthu amazibisa, anthu amafuna kukhala ndithu achitauni. Koma chikhalidwe chilibe chitauni, alisa ndi chikhalidwe chake, alisa ndi zimene amakonda.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
A legal challenge has been filed in the High Court of Zimbabwe concerning proposed constitutional changes and growing political tensions around them. Professor Talent Rusere says he has launched an urgent court application seeking a prohibitory interdict and declaratory relief against several opposition political figures and the government, including Tendai BT Jameson Timber, Lovemore Maduku, Douglas Mwanzora, Job Sikala, and among others. The application relates to interpretations of constitutional provisions around election cycles and presidential term limits, and whether a referendum would be required for proposed amendments. But to talk to us further on this, we're joined on the line by lawyer in Zimbabwe, Doug Coltart. Morning, Doug. Rather afternoon.
Morning, thanks. Thanks for having. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, can you explain for us the legal application that's been filed and what the applicant is actually asked the court to do?
Sure. So we haven't yet seen the full application. It's just the front page of that application, which has been circulated online. And I've spoken to some of the respondents who say that they have not been served with that application. But from what we can tell, it appears to essentially ask the court to put a gag order on all of these people who've been speaking about the constitutional amendments, to stop them from being able to raise issues about the constitutional amendments, in particular this very critical issue around the fact that in order to amend this part of the Constitution, a referendum is required.
So, but does Parliament have the authority to amend provisions related to the election cycle without a referendum?
So this term about election cycles, which is part of the problem that is being pushed by the regime, is to try and get away from the fact that these provisions which they wish to amend are term limit provisions. And our Constitution defines very clearly what a term limit provision is. It's any provision which limits the length of time that a person may hold office. They are seeking to amend the provision which limits the length of time that the president may hold office from a 5-year term to a 7-year term. So it clearly is a term limit provision. And what our Constitution says is that an incumbent cannot benefit from any extension to their term limit provision. The Constitution goes on to say if you want to change that rule, that an incumbent can't benefit from a change to a term limit provision, then that change would have to go to a referendum. This is in section 328, subsection 7, as read with subsection 9. The Constitution is absolutely clear on this. Previously, the Constitutional Court has ruled in a case that, in particular, section 95 that they want to amend is a term limit provision which is subject to those requirements in section 328, which would require a referendum. So at law, it is very clear that for them to proceed with these amendments, they would have to take them to a referendum. However, the regime does not want to do so because its own intelligence is that it would lose in a referendum, that these are not popular provisions, that there is incredible broad-based opposition to them. However, because a culture of fear has been created and anyone who tries to speak out has been attacked, arrested, and meetings have been banned by the police, it makes it very difficult for those who are opposed to the bill to actually get their message out there.
So now, if the court rules in favour of the applicant, what would that mean for the political actors calling for protests or public resistance? And if the court dismisses the application, what could that mean for the constitutional amendment process?
Yeah, well, I think if the court dismisses the application, it would give credence to the position that has been held by many people that these are important issues that we need to be talking about, and the fact that clearly it is a legitimate and legally grounded position to insist that any changes to the Constitution, particularly of this nature, need to go to a referendum. If the order is granted, I mean, look, we'd have to see what exactly the relief is sought, because we don't have the full relief sought. We don't yet have the full application. We also don't know whether the court will grant all of that relief. But if the court were to hand down an order essentially gagging people from speaking about an important political issue in the country, that would be an incredibly sad day for human rights, constitutional democracy, any kind of semblance of kind of the rule of law in Zimbabwe. For the court to step in and say that people are not allowed to talk about a political issue would be a very shocking ruling indeed. But of course, we have to see exactly what is in that application and what the courts might say about it.
Doug, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. That was a lawyer in Zimbabwe, Doug Coltart. Time now for our news headlines, sport and business.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Tracey. Good afternoon. Making headlines, escalating violence in South Sudan's Jonglei state has forced aid agencies, including Save the Children, to withdraw from key areas. Zambia's Foreign Affairs Minister Mulambo Haimbe has warned that ongoing conflicts across the globe are having far-reaching economic consequences, disrupting supply chains and affecting livelihoods, even in southern Africa. And finally, South Africa's former President Thabo Mbeki has used his keynote address at the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund's 30th anniversary to warn that the world is failing to protect children caught in conflict. I will have details on these and other stories at 1 o'clock.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective. Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Let's kick off with football news. Mamelodi Sundowns coach Miguel Cardoso maintains there is a lack of support for the club's CAF Champions League campaign. Ahead of tonight's quarter-final first leg against Stade Malien at Loftus Versfeld, the Portuguese mentor suggested the congested domestic schedule was making the Continental Challenge more difficult. Cardoso believes the situation is compounded by Sundowns being forced to play on pitches that do not suit their possession-based style, arguing it limits the free-flowing football the Brazilians are known for.
Sundowns, we played, as you know, 2 days ago, so we're going to play tomorrow with 3 days time distance between matches. And between the two legs, we're going to play Marumo Gallants. I don't know if you had the worry to make this exercise, but from all the 7 teams besides us on this competition, no one has matches between the two legs. No one.
To support his argument, Cardoso pointed out that Stade Malien and the rest of the other 6 teams in the Champions League were well rested ahead of this round of fixtures.
Stade Malien had 9 days to prepare this match and will not play between the two legs of the competition. Esperance had 7 days to prepare the match with Al Ahly, and they don't play between the two legs. Al Ahly had 9 days to prepare this 6 days, and they don't play between the two legs. Asfar has 6 days to prepare their match, and they don't play between matches. Pyramids, 5 days to prepare, they don't play between the two legs. I think it's absolutely a shame what's happening in South Africa and how Sundowns is being treated.
The Olympic Stadium in Rabat will host one of the most anticipated fixtures of the CAF Champions League quarter-final tonight when Morocco's AS FAR Rabat take on defending champions Pyramid FC in the first leg of their last 8 clash. For Pyramids, the tie represents the beginning of the title defense as the Egyptian side attempt to continue their rise among the continent's elite clubs. On to rugby news, Springbok fly half Sasha Feinberg Mngomezulu says the test he is most looking forward to this season is the opening Nations Cup clash against England at Ellis Park on the 4th of July. The 24-year-old reflected on his record 37-point haul against Argentina and the pressures of international rugby. Feinberg Mngomezulu described the challenge of balancing highs and lows, stressing the importance of consistency across a marathon 14-test season. I will end with tennis news. Emma Raducanu and Katie Bolter will miss Great Britain's Billie Jean King Cup qualifier against Australia in Melbourne next month. Raducanu, ranked world number 24th, has opted to play a WTA clay court event in Linz, while Bolter, ranked 64th, is also unavailable. GP captain Annie Kotavong has named Sonei Katal, Harriet Dart, Jody Barange, and 17-year-old Mika Stoyaselevich in her squad, with a fifth player to be added later. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fikile Lingwadi.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Africa at Play with Neto and ETO Chemane.
Lelitla, talk to us about your relationship with your father, Coach Pitso. What is this one thing that he said to you that is still stuck at the top of your head?
Coach Pitso and our mom, Moira Tlhagale, have always told us that whatever we do in life, we must do it to the best of our abilities and represent our family well. But the big thing is do what you love and do it with all the passion that you have. And I think we see it in both their work. I mean, my mom has done a really good job with placing Coach Pitso in different clubs around the world, and she's negotiated contracts, and she's showing that as a woman you can also do work that is seen, and you can also get respect from men in a male-dominated space. And I think my dad has also shown that you must never underestimate the Black African man.
Lelintla Mosimane, a South African communications and digital media professional. Lelintla is also a daughter to a great mentor when it comes to the game of football, Coach Jingles Mosimane.
Live every Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good afternoon. The surge in Africa's tourism and hospitality sector is a reflection of rising investor interest in the continent's expanding tourism market. This, according to the head of strategic partnerships for Africa for the Future Hospitality Summit Africa, Roy Bannister. A new report by the W Hospitality Group reveals that 675 hotels and resorts are currently in development in Africa. Bannister elaborates on the continent's tourism growth.
These 675 hotels and resorts are deals signed by the hotel chains that contributed to the survey, 42 of them in total this year. Nearly all of these deals are management and franchise deals. The likes of Marriott and Hilton, among others, are not investors, they're service providers. But on the other side of the table, on each deal is an investor, and these are investors who understand the long-term benefits of our sector. As you say, tourism is growing faster in Africa than any region. And let's be clear, tourists are not just on vacation. The term includes business travelers, government officials and diplomats, aid workers, conference delegates, religious travelers, and family visits.
The National Financial Ombud Scheme South Africa has warned consumers not to wait until repossession or foreclosure before seeking help with the debt. The group says thousands of complaints linked to the vehicle finance and home loans are already reaching its offices. According to the NFO, many consumers are unaware that they have legal options under the National Credit Act to exit or manage credit agreements. The warning comes as South Africa marks World Consumer Rights Month. NFO Adjudication Manager, Gwanda Vabaza.
In a few of the complaints that we received, I think it's over 1,300 complaints relating to secured lending, which would include the vehicle finance as well as mortgages. A lot of the people had issues with financial services providers or credit providers taking legal action to repossess those assets. We do understand that a whole lot of people are struggling financially, but we're saying that as the NFO, there are options, and options such as voluntarily surrendering the vehicle in terms of Section 127 of the NCA, or a private sale, or even a help yourself program.
Chinese brands accounted for 17% of total vehicle sales in South Africa's automotive market in the last quarter of 2025. This is according to the TransUnion South Africa Quarter 4 2025 Mobility Insights Report, which states that the country's automotive market closed 2025 at its strongest level in more than a decade, supported by easing interest rates, improving vehicle pricing, and a decisive shift in how consumers evaluate vehicle affordability. Tutongobeni reports.
According to the latest report by the global information and insights company TransUnion, South Africa's automotive market closed 2025 at its strongest level in more than a decade. This is supported by easing interest rates, improving vehicle pricing, and a decisive shift in how consumers evaluate vehicle affordability. The TransUnion South Africa Q4 2025 Mobility Insights report indicates that while headline sales reflect a clear recovery, underlying patterns reveal a market increasingly shaped by value, sharper segmentation, and intensifying competition.
The South African rand has weakened, heading for a second consecutive week of losses as surging energy prices fueled by conflict in the Middle East rattled global markets and heightened inflation concerns. Earlier, the South African currency traded at 16.94 rand against the dollar, which 0.7% weaker than yesterday's close. The currency has faced sustained pressure since the US-Israeli war on Iran started nearly 2 weeks ago. It fell over 3% last week and is poised to decline by around 2% this week. Rising oil prices pose a challenge to South Africa, a net energy importer. The US has loosened sanctions on other countries buying Russian oil and petroleum, already loaded on vessels at sea, to curb the economic impact of the US-Israel war with Iran. The US Secretary Scott Bessent says the temporary waiver is aimed at promoting stability in global energy markets. Russia says it has about 100 million barrels of oil currently in transit. Attacks on ships and energy infrastructure in the Gulf, as well as the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, have rocked global energy markets. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 393. In Botswana, it's at 13 pula 33. Kenya, 128 shilling 447. In Zambia, 19 kwacha 44. The BRICS countries in Brazil, the dollar there, 5 real 18. Russia, 79 rubles 29. India, 91 rupees 28. China, 6 yuan 87. And in South Africa, the dollar will cost you 16 rand 64 cents. $1 is trading at 74 pence to the British pound and 86 to the euro. Gold is trading at $5,083, while platinum is at $2,066 per ounce. Brent crude oil is at $101.37 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business in Johannesburg, I'm Tabisolo Hoko.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Clear your diaries for the 25th of March, 2026. Channel Africa, in partnership with Wits Business School, invites you to a climate change conversation that goes beyond talk. 3 powerful panel discussions. 1 stage. Big questions, bold answers. If you care about the future and value honest, intelligent discussions, this is your seat at the table. Join us on March 25 for Africa Matters. Climate change. Financing Africa's recovery. Only on Channel Africa. Africa Update. Your daily dose of African insights. With Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
It is now 12:45 Central African Time. Well, Channel Africa, together with Wits Business School, will be launching the Africa Matters Summit in just 2 weeks' time, taking place in Johannesburg, South Africa. It will be held under the theme Climate Change, Financing Africa's Recovery. As the countdown continues, we will be speaking to some of the influential voices who are in the climate change space about their work and how Africa can find its own solutions to the effects of climate change. Well, to speak to us more about this topic, Professor David Paho, Director of African Energy Leadership Centre at the Wits Business School. Afternoon, Professor. How are you?
Fine, Tracey, and you and your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, tell us the importance of such a summit at this time for Africa.
It is a very critical time for Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, because we are disproportionately affected, vulnerable to climate change, and then there's a need for adaptation and mitigation investments on the African continent. Unfortunately, in spite of some of the commitments which have been made, we receive a relatively small amount of funding relative to the challenges that we have. The global green issuance, for example, in 2022 was at about $500 billion, and sub-Saharan Africa just received about 4.2 billion rand between 2013 and 2021. So there's a huge investment gap on the African continent, and this has to be addressed as a matter of urgency.
But do you think that Africa can finance itself? Do we have the resources to do so?
Because of some of the challenges with a lot of the sub-Saharan countries who have huge public debt. But what we can do is to look at innovative solutions where we can use, for example, blended finance, where we can leverage private sector funding, linking up with funding from development finance institutions like African Development Bank. So there are some challenges, structural challenges for a lot of African countries, but we can find innovative approaches to the funding. And there are some wonderful examples as to how this has been achieved, South Africa being a case in point.
Why is it important for Africa to be taking this position, and how does climate change affect us as Africans?
As I said, we contribute as a continent. We contribute just less than 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions globally, but we are disproportionately affected. We see rising temperatures, erratic rainfall patterns, floods in South Africa and the rest of the African continent. We see rising sea levels and other extreme weather events which directly impact things like food security and economic instability across a lot of the African countries. So the need for us to look at funding and also adopt very strategic mitigation steps to combat climate change is imperative for economic growth and energy and water security, amongst other challenges that we have to face, notwithstanding the current fiscal gaps that we have to deal with.
Now, Africa still needs to expand energy access. How can countries balance development with climate commitments?
I think what African countries have done is very important. There's a universal agreement, at least on the African continent, that climate change is real. Hence, all 54 African countries are signatories to the Paris Climate Agreement. So there have to be a balance between economic growth and climate change. So a lot of the commitments that we have made have to be balanced with us being responsible in terms of how we leverage and monetize oil and gas resources, at least leading up to 2050. We've always said and argued that natural gas, for example, is a transition fuel to a net zero economy, because things like oil and natural gas have a much lower carbon footprint as compared to coal. So the African countries can strike a delicate balance between responsible exploitation and monetization of the vast oil and gas resources that we have in the African continent, but also rapid deployment of renewable energy sources. And they are abundant from South Africa to Namibia to other parts of the African continent. So the delicate balance can be achieved, and we've seen also with the deployment of solar energy in South Africa and a lot of African countries, which has gone a long way to mitigate climate change in terms of reducing our carbon footprint in terms of emissions.
And that comes on to my next question to you, was what role should renewable energy play in Africa's future energy mix?
It's a very integral part of Africa's energy mix, because if we deploy renewable energy, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal, what it does is it reduces our carbon footprint so that we can reduce our CO2 emissions, and then that will contribute to our defined contribution that we've acceded to in terms of the Paris Agreement. So we can drive and deploy renewable energy across the African continent to ensure that we meet our climate change obligations in line with climate change. And because we have such a unique opportunity in terms of solar, especially on the African continent, and wind, especially in some of our coastal cities, we have an opportunity to really actually leapfrog our renewable energy deployment. We have not done well over the past 20 years, but I think there are movements across the African continent to leverage from renewable energy resources. And what has worked well is that we've seen a huge decline in the cost of installing, for example, solar energy because of the advances in technology. So it's a huge opportunity for a lot of African countries where energy security is a very important part of our policy consideration to accelerate the deployment. And it's even more important considering that well over 600 million Africans don't have electricity. But renewable energy, along with natural gas, can go a long way in electrifying a lot of the African countries who need electricity to drive economic growth and competitiveness.
Now, what does it mean for Africa to develop its own solutions to climate change? And are there examples of African-led innovations that give you hope?
I mean, and maybe it's a little bit of a bias, but it's real. I mean, the whole drive also with this engagement is also for us to find ways to prioritize locally led initiatives. In South Africa, for example, our much celebrated renewable energy, public-private partnerships initiative, we saw well over $20 billion worth of private sector investments, leading up to about 6,000 megawatts of renewable electricity into our national power grid. So this is a prime example of a world-class solution driven by the private sector, empowered by government policy to drive the renewable energy deployment. So these kind of examples just shows that solutions can be found from us so that we don't are perpetually dependent on solutions from other countries, but we have to look from a regional perspective in terms of what is available and what are the best practices and great examples of what has been achieved also on our continent to ensure that some of this can be replicated across the African continent.
So now onto the Africa Matters Summit, which takes place on the 25th of March. What key conversations do you hope will emerge from the summit?
I think the first one, the elephant in the living room, is how do we scale climate finance? We have huge challenges, as I said, in terms of the discrepancies, in terms of what has been promised in terms of funding and what is available. So I think the biggest conversation is, how do we address firstly the factors or barriers which precludes us from making sure that we get a fair share of climate finance resources to drive our climate change obligations. So the most important thing is, what can we do to scale up what is required? And those conversations will help in terms of also how can we find solutions to influence public policy, to influence regional collaborations to make sure that we scale up climate finance as soon as possible to ensure that we mitigate against the adverse conditions that Africans are facing because of extreme climate change impacts.
And as we wrap up our time together, what message would you like policymakers and investors to take away from the discussion?
The discussion obviously should be, we have to strengthen institutional capacity and financial market infrastructure, specifically whether it's in climate planning, budgeting, and investment frameworks. We have to develop coherent policies and incentives to unlock private capital, whether it's in tax incentives or government-backed climate insurance and guarantees. We have to expand access to adaptation finance. And then, as I said, is that one of the biggest things that we have to drive, and hopefully it's where policymakers and governments can come together, is strengthening regional cooperation to maximize climate finance mobilization. And last but not least, as I mentioned, prioritize locally led initiatives and look at what examples are there. And I think the role of especially academic institutions will be critical in making sure that they use their convening power to drive these kind of agendas to ensure that we scale up climate finance on the African continent.
Prof, thank you so much for your time today.
It was a pleasure.
And that was Professor David Paho, the Director of African Energy Leadership Center at the Wits Business School.
Africa Update on Channel Africa with Lulu Gaboo.
Malawi's President Peter Mutharika has directed that a fresh inquiry be conducted into the plane crash that claimed the life of former Vice President Saulos Clauser political analyst Undule Mwakasangula. Undule, what are they politically and institutional factors that may have influenced President Peter Mutharika's decision to order a fresh inquiry into the crash?
Let me start by saying that the death of the former president and 8 others was a painful national tragedy. You know, public trust is very important. If people feel that the first report left gaps, the president may believe that a fresh inquiry could restore confidence and provide closure. So the decision by the president may be influenced by public pressure, but also the need to rebuild trust in the state institutions.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time. Keep Africa in your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. channelafrica.co.za.
Well, I'm Tracey Bumgard standing in for Lulu Gaboo. It is now 12:57 Central African Time. And on today's hashtag Africa Update asks, a legal challenge has been filed in the High Court of Zimbabwe concerning proposed constitutional changes and growing political tensions around them. What do you make of the latest happening in Zimbabwe? You can share your thoughts on Channel Africa's social media platforms at Channel Africa 1 on X and Instagram, at Channel Africa on Facebook, or you can send us your comments and voice notes to our WhatsApp number +27 83 288 6684. And that is how we come to the end of today's edition and the week of Africa Update. Have yourself a blessed weekend.
Africa Update, your daily dose of African insights with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
Ritmos e cultura. Com Jacob Tivani.
Hoje vamos celebrar um momento muito especial na música, em particular o universo do jazz moçambicano.
Ladies and gentlemen, senhoras e senhores,
temos o privilégio de receber um dos maiores nomes do jazz de África, moçambicano e, por que não, o mundo lusófono, Moreira Chonguissa, para falarmos sobre o lançamento da edição especial em vinil do seu icônico álbum
The Journey, The Moreira Project, Volume 1.
A música é que me escolheu e não foi eu que escolhi a música. O saxofone é que me escolheu, não fui eu que escolhi o saxofone. Eu sinto-me honrado, sinto-me de alguma maneira satisfeito e, mais importante, sinto-me feliz porque usamos o álbum The Journey como um influenciador, catalisador e eu sinto-me honrado.
Ritmos e cultura com Jacob Tivani, todos os domingos das 20 às 21 horas.
SABC News. The African Perspective.